So he goes on to encourage the slaves, and he says this, you were bought at, let me back up, verse 22. For the one who was a slave when he was called to faith is the Lord's freed person. Amen? He says to the slaves, he goes, if that's where you're a free man with the Lord. You have freedom in him. They can't control your prayers. They can't control your thoughts. They can't control your worship. They can't control any of that. All they can control is what happens with your body. That's all they can control when you're a slave. Everything else is up to you. He says, you're the Lord's freed man. And then he says, similarly, the one who was free when called is Christ's slave. Do I look at my life that way? There's an interesting kind of, I don't want to call it a dichotomy. They're not at odds with each other, but there's a dynamic at hand here because Jesus said, I don't call you slaves, right? John 15, I don't call you slaves. I call you friends. And Paul says we're Christ's slaves. So how do we look at this? What does this mean? The reality is that Christ doesn't look at us as people just to order around and destroy if we don't do what he says. Can you imagine what your Christian life would be like if that's how Jesus looked at us? If he truly looked at us as slaves? That'd be horrible. He says we're friends. Now, that's the crazy thing. Your best friend is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and we're to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. Not work for our salvation, but work it out. We fear him. And not in the sense that we're terrorized by him per se, although there should be a bit of a terror of saying, wow, he is incredible. But he's the Lord of Lords, and he's our friend. He deserves all the respect and all the worship, right? We're not going to go get t-shirts that says, Jesus is my homeboy, or something like that, because he's the Lord of Lords and he's the King of Kings, and we respect him, right? But he's the friend of sinners. And it's important that we consider these things. Am I a slave to Christ? Am I his bondslave? When he says jump, do I say how high? When he says love, do I say okay? When he says forgive, do I say I'll try? Or do we just go, yeah, he's right most of the time, but this person actually really deserves to get hated. So you don't know what they did, Jesus. No, we're invited to this incredible world. You know what's better than hating someone? Is having the joy of loving someone. You know what's better than the bondage and the anxiety of unforgiveness? Is the freedom of forgiveness, forgiving someone. The freedom of knowing that that person will stand for better, for worse before the Lord. And yet we can pray for them, that they would repent, and whatever it might be, that they would experience all that God has for them. That's what Paul is calling us to. That's what we're looking at here. And then he goes on in verse 24, brothers and sisters, each person, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. So he says, hey, we are individually each responsible to God to do his will, to maintain where he put us. Now, again, he says, look, if you're a slave and you can get out, you can be free, then be that. If you have some physical limitation and it can be fixed, then be free from it. You know what I mean? But don't be discouraged if you're in it. Does that make sense? So there's no glory from staying in a position that you could get out of that's negative. There's no bonus points just to make yourself suffer. But at the same time, if there's deliverance, take it. If there's not, it's okay. You're still the Lord's free man, free woman. Now he's going to switch gears again, and this is specific to Corinth, and we know why it's specific to Corinth. It doesn't mean it doesn't have an application for us, but it's specifically to Corinth. Verse 25. Now about virgins. Remember, virgins are people who have never been married and do not have sexual history. I have no command from the Lord. So there you go. This is Paul's opinion. He's going to tell us it's a trustworthy opinion, but he says this is not a command from God. He says, but I give a judgment as one who is, by the Lord's mercy, trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Okay? So he says, because of the present crisis, I think it's good for a person, a man or a woman, he's going to talk about women in a moment, I think it's good for someone to not get married. He says, it's my opinion as a trustworthy person who loves Jesus, right, that for right now in Corinth, because of the present distress, it would be good to stay single. And he's going to elaborate on that. He's going to go on to say, as you read this, I'm telling you this ahead of time so you can have some context. He's going to say, I'm not saying this to limit you. I'm saying this to spare you from difficulty. So this whole passage is about being spared from difficulty that was going on in Corinth. Does that make sense? Now we know that right now in Corinth, there's no bloodshed happening, right? Historically, at this point, they weren't being thrown to lions yet. You don't have that radical Titus, and then you get Nero later, and Titus and Domitian, and some of these Caesars that just absolutely go to extremes to wreck Christians, to kill them. So, but Paul, that you definitely have families forsaking you. You definitely have what we might consider, in light of what's coming, minor persecution. This could also be translated, actually, the coming distress. It's hard to say which is which. So it may be that Paul is saying, giving kind of a word of prophecy or a word of wisdom, saying there's a coming distress, and because of that, I think this is wise. Does that make sense? That's what Paul is saying. So he's going to go on, and he says there, are you pledged to a woman? Are you engaged? Do not seek to be released. Are you free from such a commitment? Do not seek for a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned, but those who will marry will face many troubles in this life, and I want to spare you this. Verse 29, what I mean, brothers and sisters, is that this time is short. So he's, again, back to this idea of time being short and to consider eternity. He says, what I mean, brothers and sisters, is that this time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as though they do not. Those who mourn, as if they did not. Those who are happy, as if they were not. Those who buy something, as if it were not theirs to keep. Those who use the things of the world, as if engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away. So now he makes some interesting statements. What do these mean? He says, if you're married, walk like you're not married. Now, is he saying, if you're married, because Jesus will come soon, kick your spouse to the curb? No, he is not saying that. He writes in Ephesians, he writes all over the place. And in Ephesians chapter 5, we're told that husbands are to cherish their wives, and wives are to respect their husbands. We're told that they're to love each other. All over the place, Peter, all these people talk about the fact that if you're married, you need to be engaged and working on your marriage to make it a better marriage, right? To continue to lift up that other person and be a blessing to them, right? So he's not now saying, well, because Jesus could be coming soon, whatever, kick him to the curb. He's just saying that we're living in light of eternity. So if you're married, you need to live in light of eternity. You say, well, how does that work in a marriage? They are about to start getting chucked to lions, literally. It was very normal that Christians would be rounded up, they would be taken to Rome itself in Italy, and they'd be brought to the Colosseum, and they'd be given a sword and a shield, and it didn't matter if they were children, and it didn't matter if they were men. And then lions would be sent out, and a lot of times the Christians would kill the lions with their sword and their shield. And then a gladiator would come out, and most of the time, from the recordings that we have, the history we have, the Christians would throw their shield on the ground, and they would stand there and pray while the gladiator ran them through. And so you saw tons of children die this way, you saw tons of women die this way, and men die this way. And so when he's calling them, he says, look, there's a present distress, or there's a coming distress, and there's a radical difficulty that's coming. And he says, I want to spare you from that. And so it's my opinion that to be spared from that you don't get remarried, or you don't get married. But he says, I'm not trying to limit you, right? You have many troubles that you're going to face. So he says, if you have a wife, live as if you have none. In other words, continue to consider eternity. When you're faced with, in Rome, they literally had, it was real centralized. It was kind of on the outskirts of Rome, but mostly very centralized. They actually had checkpoints because they knew that Christians would not burn incense to Caesar. And so they'd have a couple of guards, and they have them. You can look them up online. They've found a couple of these cards, thousands of years old, 2,000 years old, these cards, and they were issued to people that said that you had burnt incense to Caesar. And so they would set up a checkpoint, and you'd be walking through the market, and the guards would be like, let me see your certification, let me see your document that you've burnt to Caesar. And if you couldn't produce one, guess where you went? You died. Or you had the opportunity to burn it right there in a little brazier and say, Caesar is Lord. Adonai, it wouldn't be Adonai, it's Hebrew, but Caesar is the Lord, is what you'd have to say. And if you refused to do it, you were executed. You were executed in that town if you were lucky. Otherwise, you went to Rome and you fought gladiators, or you were torn to pieces. So this is very real stuff that's happening, very difficult things that were happening. There were actually even guards that would, if you paid them, they would just issue you one. So you kind of had to ask yourself, do you want to bribe a guard to get a piece of paper that says you did burn incense? Do you want to burn incense, or do you want to die? You know? And so that's what many of these Christians were faced with, and they chose the death. They chose to stand for Christ. So that's all he's talking about. But he goes on and he expands on the idea, gives us a more rounded concept where he says, hey, if you're mourning, he says, live as if you're not mourning. He's not saying don't deal with grief and carry your trauma with you. He's just saying realize that eternity is coming. The mourning is temporary. The difficulty is temporary. He says, are you happy? He says, live as if you're not happy. In other words, he's not saying you should be miserable. He's saying live in the concept that present happiness is fine, but there's something much greater coming. Don't be content with this world. Don't be happy with this world. Don't settle for this world. I love this one. It's so practical. He says, did you just buy something? Then live as if you didn't buy it. And the point he's making, he doesn't say don't buy things, right? He didn't say make sure you stop buying anything. Put Bezos out of business. He's not saying that. What he says is, if you do have something, then just act like you don't. In this sense, we're also told by Paul that he's provided everything for richness and for our enjoyment, right? That every good gift comes down from the Father of lights. You know, if you're a jet ski person or a sewing machine person or a whatever, everything in between, that's fine. He's provided those things. There's recreation or recreation in hobbies in these things. But he doesn't say don't buy stuff. What he says is if you do buy something, just live your life as if you don't own it. That it doesn't own you, right? It's fine to own stuff. It's not fine when stuff owns you. When your thoughts are consumed with the stuff. Yeah, you want to have a jet ski, you want to go to the lake or do your thing. God bless you in that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that it doesn't own you, that you're not a slave to it, that it doesn't demand from you, but you only demand from it. And then lastly, he goes on and he says, if you use things of the world as if engrossed in them. And he's just saying, do you have a job, right? Do you have a job? Do you, he uses the court system at times. Do we use the court system? Do we, different things that we might have access to? Do we get help from the government for our insurance or whatever? He says, that's fine. Whatever, go ahead and use that. But make sure that it's a light touch. Use the things of this world, but don't let them use you. That's all he's saying. Have a light touch on it. So again, because he's saying, I don't want you to have trouble. If we have trouble, because these things are going away, all those things are going away from them. Seemingly, many of our freedoms are going away too, possibly. So we want to vote our conscience. That's all just fine. But you know what? We live as if we have none. Because our life is not based on our freedoms in this world. If we end up being the slaves of the United States, we're still the Lord's free people, right? If the things get bad or ways that we don't like or whatever it might be, we're still the Lord's free people, right? It's important that we move forward that way.